Welcome to The Screen Queen, the show where I'll be talking about your favorite show or your favorite movie. You'll just have to find out what you're about to know. This is your Screen Queen, your host, Samantha Parrish. Hello there and welcome back to your show On the Go. Thank you so much for stopping by for this episode and just cruising on through and finding this show to be the one that you're going to play. I appreciate you so much. And for those out there in my audience, thank you so much for taking the time to be patient for this episode. It's been a hell of a time for your host. The book release that I talked about in the last episode, it went really well. It was a little bit complex at some times, but got through it. And then I got sick. And then the episode I recorded for this episode, it was kind of similar to the release of the new Mummy movie. I just didn't like it, and I didn't think it was good, and it shouldn't have been brought to the surface. So I'm just going to bite the bullet and just go ahead and redo the entire episode because you guys are a great audience, and you guys deserve a great show. And this is my favorite show. I don't want to just willy-nilly throw things out and not give everything into this episode because I'm already given so much support and it fuels me so much. I feel like we just made like several unintentional car jokes, but we're going to go with that because this is what the episode is about. It's about cars. But before we get into the episode, I do want to say this episode of Cars is going to be a little bit similar to how I did my Rambo episode where, yes, it originally was going to cover just the one movie, but the more I thought about the series and its legacy, it's just best to go ahead and talk about all three movies. Which is why this episode is going to be the entire history about Cars. Alrighty, so we're going to go ahead and get right into the podcast lane, and we're just going to drive right on into the first movie, Cars. So this is a couple things to know about Cars that really is going to make you change your mind. The production started for Cars in 1998, but The Bugs were a better potential movie to come out first, so A Bug's Life became the second Pixar movie. And then Cars got shelved more and more, and John Lasseter, who was one of the directors of Cars, really pushed for this film to come out in 2006. He'd worked very hard in 2004, 2005, going to different truck stops and small towns to get the feel of what Radiator Springs is going to look like for what Lightning McQueen is going to be, well, driving into. But it's also an important film for the director because it put two of his loves together, animation and cars, due to his parents. John Lasseter's parents were, what were they again? His mother was an animator and his father was a car mechanic. So in a way it was like a blast in the past for him, as well as the fact that it's like a blast in the past for a lot of people. But there is something about Cars that people just didn't like, despite the charm that it has. Even me. And I do have to share that when I first saw Cars, I didn't like it. I could not get into Cars to save my life. I didn't understand why, because I love Pixar. I started Pixar in my family, essentially, and got my cousins into it. I just couldn't really get behind the whole idea of cars coming to life, even though that's how Pixar began. In a way, Cars is like a mile marker for Pixar. Pixar began with Toy Story of having toys being brought to life, and now you have 10, 11 years later, Cars being brought to life, and you see the world it creates. But the world of Cars it's a little specific. Everything from Pixar, from Toy Story, Bug's Life, Monsters, Inc., and Incredibles has its own world, but it's a simple world. This is the world of racing. And then it really occurred to me years later why I didn't like it is because it's a sports movie. There are sports terms thrown at you. There are car terms thrown at you. There are car brands thrown at you. There are various references that are really obscure, and you would only know it if you knew the world of NASCAR and ESPN and everything else. And me being 11 years old, I'm like, I'm lost. Not even a GPS could help me get through that movie. Years later, when I read about the movie and I understood where it was at, then I kind of gave it a little less flack than I originally did. But I also found out I wasn't the only one that didn't like Cars. Many people also shared that they appreciate Cars for what it is, but they didn't really feel too attached to it like the other movies that came out. And I often wonder if it's because of what I just mentioned, with it being in a specific world where not everyone's going to be a racer, so they're not really going to want to watch a movie about that. It's kind of like with Rocky. Rocky is a boxing movie, however, it's you don't really have to know boxing to really get into it. You just have to cheer for the man. And with Lightning McQueen, you kind of have to know how to cheer for him to know how this whole thing works with racing and everything. But there's more about his character that I'll discuss later. But I do have to give this credit to Cars. It's a good introduction movie. Look at the movie Rango. Rango was the introduction of Westerns to kids to understand how the elements of Westerns worked. And to see Cars, now we see all of these routines and protocols that goes into the world of racing, which is great. Going to be a little bit lost in a long way, but at least it's nice to have some kind of a guide to get through it, and you do kind of have like a modern day rookie with having Lightning McQueen. I don't think we've really had that yet with sports and kids movies yet. Sometimes it's a little bit hard to kind of put that together because kids are still kind of grasping for what they want to do in life. But there's something that people don't really know about Cars, and this is actually something that I learned fairly recently from my grandfather to put together for the cast history of Cars. One of the characters in Cars is Doc Hudson, who kind of serves as like the Miyagi to Lightning McQueen. And it has been known and mentioned that this is Paul Newman's favorite role, which, you know, out of his whole career, the talking car was the one that he loved the most, and for a reason, because Paul Newman was a very famous drag racer in his area. And from what my grandfather told me, he would get in his car and he would just go cruising up and down the lanes looking for people to race. And from what my grandfather told me is in interviews, they asked his wife, like, will you go with him? And she's like, well, of course I have to go with him. He's going to get in trouble. They're like, well, that does kind of make sense in a way, because Doc Hudson was like the eerie parallel to Lightning McQueen, that his life was going to end up like Doc's one day. Doc Hudson used to be the best race car around, won 3 piston cups, and one car accident changed everything. And it does play on a real life fact about athletes that sometimes they're not going to have a career when they're all better. Time had moved forward without them, and they have no choice but to find a place without racing, without the very love of their life within that realm of athleticism. Knowing that little snippet, it elevates the role of Doc Hudson so much more than it did than just being known as, oh, well, he played the mentor character to Lightning McQueen to help shape him up. But knowing that there was a lot of parallels to the role, that he was a racer and he's playing a race car, like that's got to be a nice little final farewell to put like a nice little end cap on a career, because this was the last role for Paul Newman, and he passed away in 2008. And unfortunately, there were a lot of other people in Cars that passed away too. There was George Carlin, who played Fillmore, the hippie RV. Then there was Linda Petty's death. That will be a name you might not recognize, because she played someone that didn't have much screen time on the movie. She played the wife of the other rival of Lightning McQueen, the King. So her character was called Mrs. the King. So, in a way, Richard Petty got to be able to bring his wife in for the Cars movie and play his wife in the Cars movie. So you have like this couple that got to work together in a movie, basically playing themselves, and she died in 2014. So unfortunately, it's both kind of bittersweet to have to see her limited role in the movie, knowing she got to work with her husband. But the biggest of them all that is so sad, this is weird, I never thought I'd have to say such sad stuff about Cars, but here I am. The biggest death of them all was the co-director, Joe Ranft. Joe Ranft has been one of the pinnacles of Pixar next to John Lasseter and did so many voices. He was the voice of the caterpillar, I think it was Heinrich. In A Bug's Life, he did numerous other roles. I think he was the squeaky penguin in Toy Story 2. Don't quote me on it, but I think so. He's basically been in every part of Pixar. And his cancer got worse and worse and worse, and he died in 2005. He never got to see the release of Cars in 2006. But the first name you saw at the credits was his name for Joe Ranft. Like, they had to let it be known this man worked tirelessly on this movie. And he worked with someone like John Lasseter, who really built this into a passion project. So to help someone else with their childhood legacy and their whole childhood homage, bring it to life to show other kids. So in a way, Joe Ranft's memory does carry on. Even though people might not know his name, but they'll know the work. So when people look into Cars, they'll find his name and appreciate what he did. There's a couple more things that I want to talk about with Cars to just shift onto some happier and also compelling ideas, which, damn, I never thought I'd have to say compelling to a movie like Cars. Lightning McQueen's character is, like I mentioned earlier, the rookie to introduce to kids. Like, this is what it looks like to see a character that gives it their all, but they don't really have a heart of gold. Like, they lack the true essence of sportsmanship to have camaraderie, to be compassionate, to be fair, well, he is fair, but he's not really, what's the word I'm looking for? Let's just say it. He's selfish. He's a selfish character. Or, as I would put it, he's just a cocky Rocky. He hasn't really gotten in his head yet. His hood. I don't know. But let's just go with hood. That he really has to grow up a little bit more, get wet behind the ears, and train a little bit more before he thinks he's the best car that was ever created. But he is one of the very few Pixar characters that you have at a very cocky level. You do have other characters that are naive, kind of like Flit from A Bug's Life, that just wants the best for his ant colony and didn't really do his homework through, but, you know, he just was trying. He didn't know what was going on. The same thing with Monsters, Inc. They didn't really know what was going on. They were just doing their jobs. And same thing with Woody in Toy Story. He was jealous, but that's kind of humane. And then you have Lightning McQueen. Out of nowhere, this is your new protagonist that you have to root for, but you also don't want to root for him because he's being a bag of dicks. He's just not really reliable and very selfish, but you also know that it's Pixar. He's going to learn his lesson, but how is he going to learn his lesson? And it is satisfying to see a character like him really understand morals and values and the true value of sportsmanship. No one likes a sore loser or a sore winner. Everyone in Radiator Springs does teach some semblance of camaraderie and good sportsmanship to Lightning McQueen. And that could easily be written off as cliched in some kind of a Lifetime or Hallmark movie, but it does have a more powerful impact in this kids' movie. It does teach something without having to be so simple and so dumbed down that it does get across a lot of very important values to keep in mind when you're going into anything. You could kind of take out the whole idea of racing and apply it to anything. I really like the core part of Cars because it feels like it's not paying attention to racing anymore. It's paying attention to the character development of Lightning McQueen. That's something that a lot of people can relate to and kind of think, well, maybe I should be a little bit more fair to people. Maybe I should do this a little bit more. It makes you give the question that makes it feel like it's forced onto you. That's generally what I kind of got when I got more of an adult perspective on Cars. Having a good sense of morality goes a long way. It's worth more than any award in the world. And it is nice that that's basically what Lightning McQueen wins in the end. Hate to spoil it for you. Well, kind of. You'll see how it ends if you've seen Cars. You'll see he does win something. Of all the movies I've ever seen in my life, I have never heard of a movie that has more intimate elements of personal history like Cars. There are other ones that I've heard about, but not as much as Cars has, with the marriage of Richard Petty and his wife being in the movie, and Joe Ramp's death, Paul Newman being a race car driver, a drag racer. There's a lot of racing in this movie. It's racing through my head. You have to forgive me if there's a couple things I don't really put the brakes on to be able to fix myself in time. And then you have the other elements of racing. And I mentioned John Lasseter having an affectionate side for Cars because of his upbringing. That's so much that goes into this movie, and it's not known because people look at it for the Lightning McQueen character. Not many people really know all those elements. When you look at Cars, no one knows the story. They just see Lightning McQueen, Mater, that's it. But I hope that with all this mentioned, it does make Cars go to a different lane for most people. Second movie, however, there was kind of a unanimous decision that everyone was in the same lane when it came to Cars 2. Okay, so I have to confess, I've never seen Cars 2. That sounds a little unfair considering I'm talking about 3 movies. It means I'd have to see all 3 movies. Well, I tried to watch Cars 2. I was a little bit older, so I was okay with taking the time to look at the plot of everything, but God, it looked so dumb. I couldn't believe this would be a sequel to something like Cars. There's problems within the first 20 minutes of the movie. So, this is a complaint, but it's a complaint that I have to give a little bit of compassion to because of what this movie had to work with. Because of the death of Paul Newman, there was no recasting of Doc Hudson out of respect for Paul Newman. But how do you kill a car? How does that work? You just gonna go? Is he not gonna be there? I'm still glad they took the time to be able to address the fact that Doc Hudson would not be present for the movie due to the real-life death of Paul Newman, but it was so quick. Quite literally. There's a scene in there where Lightning McQueen looks very sad at the mural for Doc Hudson as he drove away and never came back. Basically kind of like, I don't know, that's how cats die, right? He died a cat death. Which, okay, alright, I guess is what we're going to have to pass for the logic in this car world. But after it's mentioned, it's quickly forgotten and we moved on to Mater. We don't get the time to sit with the fact that Doc is gone. And then we move on to Mater. And I guess it's now time to talk about Mater's character. I didn't mention a lot of Mater in the first part of this episode because I wanted to save the commentary to compare and contrast. In the first movie, Mater is a lovable small-town character. The dynamic that Mater has with Lightning McQueen, it does fit having a character that's a little bit laid back and having a little bit more compassion to serve as one of the people to teach Lightning McQueen to not be so much of a dickhead, which is great. But it's a good thing that there's small increments of Mater. It's an ensemble movie. Everyone has a great part to play in the movie. We go off some of the greatest cast members. And then in Cars 2, we don't get too much of that. We do have another great cast with some new additions. I believe Michael Caine was in the movie. You can quote me on that or don't quote me on that. I think that's who it was. Having Mater as the focus of the movie, it's like watching a rubber band just continue to stretch out and doesn't even snap. It just becomes this little flimsy piece of stretched out hope is what it was. All the other Pixar movies at that point had fantastic sequels. Toy Story was able to shell out a fantastic sequel with great follow-ups and continuation of characters and fleshed out new characters. But we don't get that. And from what I understand, none of the characters in this movie carry on into the next movie, which seems kind of like this movie should have just been one of the many parts of Cars' spin-off series, Mater's Tall Tales. That was already catered to Mater. I mean, I've seen more Mater than any other Pixar character. We still see a little bit of like Woody and Buzz and those tiny little increment Pixar shorts, but nothing like Mater. It's something both good and bad, and I'm sure Larry the Cable Guy loves this role and he's gonna get her done for this character, which is fantastic, and it utilizes the best of his comedy. I just feel like this wasn't the way to have millions and millions of dollars being used as a Pixar movie. I cashed out of this movie. I was kind of disappointed that I wanted to be proved wrong about what I felt. However, when Cars 3 came out, that's when I changed my mind. In 2017, when the teaser trailer dropped for Cars 3, I'll be honest, that has got to be the most dramatic and impactful teaser that Pixar has done. It almost parallels the trailer that we got for The Lion King, where all you saw was the sun rising over Africa. In this one, you have Lightning McQueen appearing to be in a very bad car accident on the racetrack. That does tell you everything you need to know, that something has gone wrong. The time has come for the end of Lightning McQueen. We knew this was going to happen. It's just like when you watch in all the Rocky films. At some point, Rocky's not really going to win the fight and keep going, or lose the fight and keep going. Lightning has done what appears to be his final race. And honestly, I love the way they did the plot for Cars 3. It really does parallel what the rest of your career is going to be in sports. And that is true. No one's going to go on forever. You either retire or you become a part of the industry as an announcer. And they do make a lot of references and examples of what that looks like with numerous characters that you've come to like and you have to say goodbye to, or some that you get a cameo appearance for. There's a certain part in Cars 3 where the villain from the first movie, Chick Hicks, is an announcer for the Piston Cup racetrack thing, whatever that's called. I honestly forget. Racing's not my strong suit. Cars is not my favorite movie, so those little details aren't really going to be embedded into my head, but I'm sure the listeners out there get the gist of what I'm trying to talk about. I'll be honest though, I think the strongest thing about Cars 3 is the fact that it doesn't play on the pun about cars. Almost the entire trilogy of the movie has been spent playing on the fact that it's cars. So there's songs like Shut Up and Drive, Life is a Highway. Even pun-based bands like The Cars play in the movies. There's a specific scene I want to talk about in Cars 3. In this car bar, I thought I'd never have to say that in my lifetime. During this scene where Lightning McQueen is discussing the old times that Doc Hudson had with the people that knew Doc and getting all these stories about him and learning what he can be able to do differently as a race car driver to keep up. There's a song playing in the background that is honestly a mature choice, even for a film that's aimed for kids. It's a cover of Glory Days by Bruce Springsteen, and even though it's just only a few frames, I love the fact that this was the first non-car themed song, and it adds so much more to the plot. It makes it intelligence. Really, really, hear me out. Everything else was just kind of a shameless insert because it's a car movie. Cars isn't really known for having a distinguished soundtrack that sticks out from the other Pixar movies. It's just a play on words. Then you have a remake of Glory Days in there that adds to the certain scene where it is trying to add to the ambiance and add to what's currently going on. So it's a song that really does parallel. And I wish people paid more attention to this song. This one really didn't get as much credit as I thought it was going to get credit for. This just might be the second and maybe last time that a Bruce Springsteen song was used in a kids movie or a kids show. You might have to do your homework on that, but trust me, it's going to pay off what you find. When I talked about Cars 3 to my friends, they kind of looked at me like there was something wrong with me. They were like, "You like Cars 3?" I'm like, "Yeah." It had a lot of intelligence behind it. And the moment I'm going to talk to you guys about is the one moment that I hope this will make people change their mind about the Cars series. We didn't get the proper goodbye for Doc Hudson in Cars 2 because it was just too Mater focused. So for Cars 3, I was shocked to hear a little bit more of Doc Hudson. There was archived audio that was never used in the first Cars movie that they used for flashback scenes with Lightning McQueen talking to Doc Hudson. You got one last breath of Paul Newman on the screen, and just saying that made my eyes a little bit mistied. That was the proper send-off. That Cars 3 really should have just been Cars 2. This is what we should have gotten for Cars 2. We had a lot more emotional and intelligent moments that we needed to have. If you look at our other sequels we had, well, really, the one sequel that we had so far, which was Toy Story 2 and 3, and yeah, a little bit of Finding Dory, that had some intelligence to it as well. They really upped the ante to flesh out all their characters. We got that with Cars 3. We got some great moments going back in time to see more about Doc Hudson's past and all the people involved with him. We got other characters involved. We got to see how Lightning McQueen matured. It was the nice way to put everything together. Looking at the Cars legacy now, I'm still shocked to know that there's more to Cars than what I expected to know about Cars. Cars was our first trilogy movie, and the first one to finish. Toy Story is going to go on for a long time, Finding Nemo, Incredibles, Monsters, Inc., but Cars was the first one to really give us a beginning, a very bizarre middle, and a very fitting end. It did teach us a lot about camaraderie, about friendship, and it did lead a lot of kids to learn about the world of racing. I sure didn't really learn too much about racing, but I'm sure it's going to do something for kids, and that's the bottom line of a movie, is that it's going to do something for someone. This movie is going to inspire someone to go into the world of racing, or to learn more about how cars work, or, in my case, having a conversation with their grandfather about cars. When I watched Cars 3 with my grandfather, I'll be honest, it's one of my favorite moments I ever had watching a movie with a family member. We sat there, and he pointed out all the cars that he remembered growing up. Cars 3 became that film that we now bond over. I didn't think it'd be that, but we never know what the film is going to be. There is something to take away from Cars, whether it's the humor or the heart or the car. You just never know what you're going to drive into with this movie. Or the other 2 movies. So now we've come to the finish line for this episode. Thank you so much for listening. I appreciate all of those out there that take the time to listen to these episodes. So now is the time to find out what the next episode is going to be on the Screen Queen. But December's coming up pretty soon. And by pretty soon, I mean next week. So I have an entire selection of random Christmas movies, Christmas TV shows, and possible Christmas specials in this little bucket that I am looking at. So now we're about to find out what the first episode is going to be for the Christmas series on the Screen Queen. Alrighty, let's get this mixed up really good. Here we go. Okay, and I got one. Oh, I got one. It's a lot. Nope. Yep, I got just one. Sometimes I get some little stragglers. Of course. That makes so much sense. Oh my god. Wow. You guys don't even know why I'm so shocked at what this episode is. Because it's really important. It's very, very important. And it almost seems fitting that this is the first episode. So your first episode of the Christmas series on the Screen Queen is The Long Kiss Goodnight. Yes, I know. What? You probably have never heard of that before, and if you have, you are amazing for knowing that movie, and you'll find out why in the world this is in the Christmas series. Well, that is fantastic. Oh, that's going to be my first Christmas movie of the year. Fantastic. Alrighty. Well, you all take care. Thank you for listening, and have a wonderful Thanksgiving. This is your Screen Queen, signing off. Bye-bye!